Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you. I'm David Severance, the leadership coach here at Chirag Shah Coaching. Delighted to have you with us this morning or this afternoon, wherever you may happen to be, to finish off this particular week of the GCI Accelerator. In thinking about today's session, I've been guided a little bit by a bunch of calls that I've received from clients over the last week or so. We get these quite regularly, of course, but over the last week or so, I've had an abnormally large number of calls from folks who are just saying they are overwhelmed. They've had it. They're worn down. They're worn out. They're sick and tired of what's been going on for the last year and a half. The work keeps coming over and over and over again, and they're sick of it. And it's a really stressful, uncomfortable place to be. I'd like to ask everyone a similar question. How many of you, just put it in the chat box if you would, please. How many of you sometimes or often feel like you're overwhelmed, you're worn down, you're worn out, like you just wish the whole thing would just stop for a while so you could take a breath? If that's you, please put a yes in the chat. Got it. Thank you. So my question for all of you is, so what happens when you feel that way? What do you do? How do you react? Do you like close the door, turn off your phone and curl up into a ball for a few hours? Do you start drinking, go grab the wine or the beer or something like that because you feel like that's the best way out at this moment? Perfectly fine. Mia says she takes a walk. How do you respond when you feel like it's just too much for too long? Silent scream. Love that one. Sure. So the point here is this is a fact of life, especially at this particular time in the marketplace. Yes, real estate is always a busy business. And yes, this particular period that we've all been fortunate or unfortunate enough to live through is especially trying, especially taxing. But if we want to lead ourselves through this period and come out on the other end without like scars and all of that, then there's ways for us to manage ourselves. We have to find ways to manage ourselves that allow us to get through the challenges that we're facing and come out more or less unscathed on the other side, or at least ready to get up tomorrow and do the whole thing over again. And so many clients are calling Chirag and I and saying, gosh, I've had it. There's just too much. It's too much for too long. I'm just sick of it and I don't know what to do. So today I'm going to share a couple of things with you, some steps that you might take when you experience some kind of stress or challenge that's really kind of worse than usual and really overwhelms you. And my hope is that there'll be something on these slides. It's something that you haven't tried, something that you don't normally do, something that you can add to your own particular toolbox about how to manage yourself as effectively as possible during these times. It's not enough to just simply do everything you can for your clients, right? You're building not just a business here, you're building a life for yourself. And for those of you who, are experiencing so much pain and suffering along the way, you have to ask yourself sometimes, is it worth it? Well, if you decide to stay in the business, which obviously all of you care about doing, that's why you're here, you need to have whatever skills, tactics, or techniques to help you move through. So I'm going to share a few things, and then after that, we'll talk a little bit about it and hear from a few more of you about how you move yourself through these challenging moments. By the way, we're going to stop a couple of minutes before the hour because we have a webinar coming up right on the hour regarding the Boston program next week. So let me pull up the slide deck and we'll go through it and then we'll talk a little bit about it after. Making challenges less challenging. The first thing I want to say about challenges is an awful lot of this is how do we perceive what's going around us in the first place? By that, I mean, are we simply a punching bag for circumstances, for the situations we find ourselves in? Is there nothing we can do to help ourselves through challenges? And do we all experience things in the same way? For example, if people see someone in a wheelchair, you might say, oh gosh, what a terrible life that person's having, right? Wouldn't it be awful to be stuck in that wheelchair? And yet we know from hearing from some people that actually they don't really suffer there. There's an old saying, Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. And so for me, that's something for us to think about when we're thinking about these things, because we are going to experience the painful circumstances in which we're working, especially if you're working with buyers, for example. But the question is that sufferable for us, or is it not? When you think of some people who are in wheelchairs, some people absolutely, they're despondent, they feel like their life is over, and yet others are so happy. How is that possible? If circumstance was simply what was dictating the experience that we have of our life, then everybody experiencing the same circumstance would have the same experience of life. And we know that that's not true. What this really tells us is challenges themselves are not inherently challenging. The challenge comes from how we perceive what's happening to us and what we do with that. That makes sense? It's a really big point here. You have to examine how you perceive what's happening around you. Because when you perceive what's happening around you as too much or unfair or unreasonable or whatever, naturally, you're going to have a certain feeling about it. Now, I'm not saying that you should just be like Pollyanna and just, not recognize the severity or challenge of anything that's around you. What we want to point out at this point is how you perceive what's happening to you is half the battle. So what makes a challenging situation challenging? Let's get a little more detail about this. You might say, well, it's hard. It's not easy. But let's drill down a little bit and recognize that situations are actually a little bit different from case to case. Sometimes the situation is challenging because it's a threat to your goal achievement. That is, you want to hit a certain GCI number, or you want to sell a certain number of, work with a certain number of clients this year, or you want to have some other kind of a target that you've already set for yourself. And if this deal doesn't go through, or if you don't win this pitch or something like that, it's going to threaten your goal achievement. That's one kind of source of challenge for us. Other times, it's simply the fact that something comes to us unanticipated. We didn't see it coming. It just dropped out of the blue, and we've got to do something about it. We can't really get around it. That's a separate kind of an issue. Third, sometimes we find ourselves in a situation where the cost to solve something or the opportunity that's there requires a significant investment in time, effort, or money, like hiring somebody. You want somebody to be there, but there's a lot of work involved in figuring out what kind of person you need, finding people who you might interview, going through the interview process, onboarding and training them. There's an awful lot of work there involved. It's absolutely challenging. And finally, sometimes the situation will trigger an emotional response. That is, we might feel angry, we might feel anxious, we might feel nervous about something. And what do we do with those feelings? What do we do with that part of our experience? Well, emotional intelligence is one thing. Some of you may have read something about emotional intelligence. That's the way that we manage our emotional experience rather than have our emotional experience kind of manage or control us. Talk about that on another day, but I want to go into each of these four things. Each of the next 4 slides will be dealing with one of these bullet points. And for each one, we've got a couple of steps that you could choose to take next time you find yourself in a situation that's especially challenging for you. And our intention is, hopefully, our hope is that one of these things is something that's new or different or something you haven't tried before that you could apply next time you have a challenge. So let's go through these one by one. First, when something threatens your goal achievement, how can you respond? 3 different ways. First, ask for help. There are many of you, and we've heard it from you, who say, I'm not a person who asks for help very often. I'm building my own business. I can handle it all. I balance a lot of things. I got a lot of balls in the air. Somehow I make it all work. And I've got this great reliance on my experience and my knowledge and my effort, all of that. That's all really good. But sometimes the best thing to do is ask for help. And if it's not your normal practice, sometimes you have to say to yourself, I should ask for help. So think of who you know, another agent here in this community, or anybody who's a Compass agent, or anyone who you can kind of have on call and say to that person, you know what, sometimes I get a little stressed out and I could really just love to connect with you during those times. Would you be willing to do that with me? The person says, sure, they care about you, they want to help you. And you say, I don't necessarily want you to solve my problem, but I just need somebody to talk to sometimes. Would you be willing to do that? Boom, now you've got something set up. Next time you have a problem, call that person. 2, change the parameters of your goal. When we set a goal, we recognize that we want to get to something and we're not there at this time. Like there's a gap between where we are and where we'd like to be. And you could imagine that the further that gap is, the more tension or difficulty there is for us to get there. It's kind of like a rubber band. The more you stretch the rubber band, the more tension there is. And when something comes along that threatens that particular goal, what do you do? Because you feel that gap especially strongly at that moment. What you can do, one thing you can do is just change your goal. Change the parameters of your goal. For example, instead of saying, I need to sell one house every month, you know what? For the next 3 months, I've got my mother who's living with me, and that's a big burden on me. I'm going to just try to sell one house every other month. Changing that parameter can suddenly lift a huge weight off of your shoulders. Just like when you have a tight deadline, like that's the target. But if somehow the deadline gets extended by a couple of days, suddenly it's a lot lighter. Same thing, change the parameters of your goal. That doesn't mean that you want to do this every single time you come up against a challenge, but it is an option, and sometimes it's the right option. Third, do an accelerated brainstorm. An accelerated brainstorm is a very brief brainstorming conversation that you have with somebody that you know well and that you trust. No more than 15 minutes, can be as little as 10 minutes. And in this case, the same thing as before. You call up somebody ahead of time and you say, sometimes when I get stuck with stuff, it really helps me to just have somebody to talk about it with. Would you mind talking through something with me from time to time and just be kind of my brainstorm partner? Person says yes. Next time you find yourself stuck, you call up that person, you say, I'm having a little trouble right now. Could we just talk for 10 minutes? And you just tell that person two things. Here's a situation. Here's what I've thought of or tried so far. And then you spend those 10 minutes, maximum 15, coming up with one or two other steps, 3 other steps that are ones you might consider taking. Not that you have to make a decision at that point, but just to get more food, more kind of ideas in the hopper for you to think through. That 10 or 15-minute investment you make with one other person can make the difference between having a way out or getting stuck and not having that way out. So 3 things you can do. Choose one of them if any of them feel right to you. Next, when something's unanticipated, 3 things you should think about doing here. First, remember something like a mantra like this, which is, what doesn't kill me only makes me stronger, or God has a plan for me, or something like that that empowers you in the moment to make sure that you can continue to move on when something untoward or unanticipated pops up. Can't be something that's not true for you. It has to be a statement that you believe that feels like it's right for you. Like, I've been through 1,000 of these and I'm going to get through this one too, for example. Or, I never give up. My greatest strength is my perseverance. Some kind of an affirmation like that that can help you just power through something when the time comes. Second, this is very important. Schedule time to think about why you were surprised. Build time into your calendar for 30 minutes or even 15 minutes and think, why did this come out of the blue for me? I've been doing this work for 7 years now. I ought to know what I'm doing. How come I didn't see this happening? How come I didn't see this coming? Especially if something happens to you 2 or 3 times, that's a really important flag that you're missing something in how you're leading yourself or your business. And you need to be able to spend some time thinking about where that's coming from. Otherwise, it's going to happen again. Third, a way out of this one is to build unscheduled time into your calendar. I know everybody's calendar is tight, but if things that are unanticipated are getting in the way, maybe what you can do is schedule 30 minutes somewhere in the day, or 15 minutes, maybe in the middle of the day or later in the day, as absolutely unblemished time. And then when something comes up that's unanticipated, you have a window to work with, try to fix it. Most people don't do this. They just don't even think of a schedule and they just go along with everything that's happening in that particular day. But if you're just putting out fires all the time and it's just one fire to the next, to the next, to the next, it's not only a very difficult situation, it not only feels heavy and difficult, but you may not have the resource that you need, the time resource, to actually solve something that's unanticipated. So if you have a chance to fit in 15 minutes a day, same time every day, or a different time, whatever works for you, 15 to 30 minutes, then if something comes up, you have that resource available to you. It's really important to think this through because there's not much you can do when something's unanticipated. You don't have a lot of options typically. And so if you do have a way to give yourself a little more time resource, at least, that can be a huge game changer. Next, when the solution will cost you a lot of time, effort, or money, it's important to remember that the cost of business is something that comes in different forms. Sometimes it's a financial cost. Sometimes it's a cost in your time. Sometimes it's a cost in your effort. If you want that great teammate, yeah, you have to spend the time and the money and the effort to find the right person and bring that person and acculturate that person onto being a great member of your team. It's part of doing business. It's part of being successful. You can remind yourself that the cost of business is really the path to success. Second, track the cost. Very often when we think that something's going to cost us a lot of money, that's just our kind of brain running away with itself. And sometimes the cost isn't as severe as we thought it would be. We might think that something is so difficult and complex that it's going to take so much time to solve. But when we actually have a meeting with some people to solve the problem, we find out we solve it in about 45 minutes or an hour, and then we go and we put the plan into action. So it wasn't as costly as we thought it might be in the end. It's important to track the cost, to just remind yourself that sometimes your idea about what it might be is not always accurate. And I see your message here about repeating 3 things. Can you just come off mute for just a minute and tell me which 3 you're talking about?
Sorry, I was here a little late, but you were talking about, where was it? Oh, about when they threaten your goal achievement. There were 2 things.
Sure.
Here's.
Let me go back to that.
Thank you.
Yep. So 3 things when they threaten your goal achievement. Ask for help. If you're not a person that asks for help, you're hurting your business and it's costing you money. There are tons of people around who are willing to give you help. They like you. They care about you. They want to see you succeed. Think about the kind of person that you would need to handle a situation that you anticipate coming next time, and put that person on call ahead of time. Say, when this happens, would it be all right if we talk for 10 minutes? Sometimes that can be the big difference. Change the parameters of your goal. You can do this at any time. You don't want to do it all the time, but sometimes it makes all the difference. And 3rd, accelerated brainstorm. Do you have those, Ann? Okay, great. Thank you.
Let's continue. It. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, last one. When the situation triggers an emotional response, this is where there are many different things you can do. Some people might meditate. Some people might do some kind of yoga exercise or something. At the very least, you can count to 10. You can take a 5-minute walk. Sometimes all you can do and all you need to do is just breathe for a minute. Just take a breath. Sometimes something seems so overwhelming that it literally takes your breath away. Simply remembering to breathe, remembering to take a moment away from the situation to kind of recenter yourself can help. Secondly, reserve 10 minutes to think to reflect on the threat, because sometimes our perception of the threat is not really valid. Like we might tell ourselves something like, if I lose this deal, I'm not going to be able to, Compass isn't going to pick me up next year. Well, we don't know that for certain, right? We don't know what's going to happen next time you have a deal with Compass, but just to say, well, if this falls through, I'm cooked, is not necessarily valid. It's certainly not helpful. When we think about what the threat is, we want to think about what the nature of the threat is. Is the threat a threat to our finances, our relationships, or our reputation in the field professionally or personally? Very often, when you think about the nature of a threat, you can assign it to one of these 3 categories. And it's really important for you to do that. You need the awareness to be able to think about how to respond. If it is a threat to your finances, okay, that's one kind of a question or situation to consider. Very different if it's about your reputation. And you may care more about finances than you care about reputation, or the other way around. But this is a way of gaining a greater awareness of what you're facing so that you can create a more appropriate response to whatever it is. 3rd, talk it out, name the fear. That is, call somebody and share what it is you're experiencing. Neurobiological research now shows that when we name the emotion that we are experiencing, the emotional experience gets reduced in us. Those of us who have done emotional intelligence work for the last couple of decades have known this to be true for a long time. They finally confirmed that the amygdala, which is the area of your brain in your midbrain that gets triggered by an interpretation of threat or risk, will fire up, and it will actually shut down the very prefrontal cortex of your brain, which is why it's hard to think when you're really triggered by something. It's hard to reason or analyze something when you're really triggered. You're just so upset, you're so stressed out that you can't really think. But the research now shows that if you simply name what it is you're experiencing, that particular activity in your amygdala reduces. It's a surprising finding, but it's not surprising for people who are familiar with emotional intelligence work. And so you call someone up and you say, listen, when I think that I might lose this particular client, I'm afraid that it's going to affect my ability to stay with Compass in the future. Or if when I think that I might not get this particular listing, I'm afraid that I'm not going to hit any of my targets in the next quarter, or whatever it is. To be able to say, when I think X and I'm afraid that, is actually a tool you can use to bring your emotional gradient down. It sounds silly, it sounds trite, but the research backs it up. Finally, remind yourself, you're doing the very best you can at the best job in the world. You're blessed to be able to do this work. Doesn't mean it's ever easy. Doesn't mean it's always a joy. Doesn't mean that every day is a great day with a victory. But you can ask yourself, would I rather be doing something else? Probably at a moment here and there. Yeah, probably the answer is, yeah, I would rather be doing something else. But over the long run, for most of you, that's why you're here. You wouldn't want to be doing anything else. So just to remember that this is all part of, like the unfolding of life, the unfolding of your business and career. And it's just part and parcel of the whole experience. Okay, let me pull these down. So let me first ask, who has a question about any of these items? Just raise your hand and I'll be happy to take a question or two. Okay, let me ask you, which of these things is one that has not been part of your toolbox up to now? Please put that into the chat. What's one of these things? I see Miriam raised her hand. Miriam, please go ahead.
I just wanted to let you know that I think Robert confirmed that we don't have to worry about not working with Compass, because his thing is he only wants us to be happy and make sure that Compass made our life better. Those are the only things that are needed to stay with Compass. So welcome.
Great. Well, great. So then my response to that is, do you believe that?
Yeah.
If you believe that, then great. That's not a worry anymore. But if I ask all the agents that I work with, do you believe that? They'll say, well, I like the idea. I love the sense of what he's trying to do there, but do I believe that they could never, ever do anything to me until the end of time? No. Could Robert Refkin, as the CEO of a public company, not be the CEO at some point? Absolutely. So I'm still a little nervous about that. That's what my clients would tell me.
Seriously? Wow.
Well, my clients are you guys. And those are the kinds of things I hear as a hesitation, right? I mean, what we're talking about here is perception of risk, right?
Yeah.
And so how many times has somebody said to you, I love you, but you still wonder whether they really love you, right? Right? They've told you a million times, but they haven't said it in the last week, or they haven't said it in the last 2 weeks. And so you kind of start wondering, do they really love me, right? Or did you ever pass somebody in the hall that you work with and you have a pretty good relationship with or whatever, and you say good morning, but they don't say good morning back. And you're like, uh-oh, are they angry at me? Did I do something wrong? Did I say something wrong? Right? It's very easy for us to interpret what's around us in a way that recognizes some kind of potential risk for us. So I'm not saying that Robert's wrong, and I'm not saying you shouldn't believe him. All I'm saying is what it comes down to is not the reality out there. It comes down to how you perceive the reality.
He was caught off guard with the question. So
got it.
In our office, and he's too genuine. He was so caught off guard. He's like, huh.
Got it. Well, speaking of unanticipated, right?
Yeah.
So please put into the chat box, which one of these items on any of those slides is one that you have not normally applied when you felt really overworked, overstressed, ready to just cash the whole thing in? What's one of those that stands out for you?
Or easy.
Thanks so much. Thanks to Jake and thanks to Miriam for your comments. I'll only say that to close, your business only grows to the extent you grow. And it's not all about your skills. It's about all this stuff that Jake was just talking about too. So have a great day, everybody. Hope you can apply these things next time they happen to you. Let us know how it works. And for those of you who will be in Boston next week, I look forward to seeing you there. Come find me. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.